it's not doomsday for Sweat, but I could see a fall out of the first round. I wouldn't be surprised.
So what you're saying is he's going to be sweating it?
Yeah. If he were to attend the draft, he could have been sweating it, but
Ugh.
Welcome to the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. Today we have the NFL Draft Special. It's my favorite time of year. It's like Christmas for me. Seriously, I'm here with Jonathan Dixon, Piano Man. He's our producer here. We're going to go through picks 1 through 32 on my mock draft, which can be found at BigEasySportsTalk.com. Now, we are a couple of days shy of the NFL Draft. We're producing this on Monday night, and there's still a lot of things that can be changed. So I'm not necessarily going to lock myself into picks right now, but I am going to go through my mock draft and just kind of give potential prospects for each pick and kind of talk about my thinking, who teams I've heard are interested in, and which players kind of fit what systems best. And we'll cover every team briefly, and we're going to just go ahead and get started right here because it should be a doozy. We're talking the Arizona Cardinals that pick number 1 overall. And, Piano Man, there's a lot of talk right now about who the Cardinals are going to take number 1. Most people believe it's Kyler Murray, the quarterback out of Oklahoma. He, as you know, and as we talked about on this podcast before, he was said to be a favorite of new head coach Cliff Kingsbury. In fact, Kingsbury, when he was in college, he was coaching for Texas Tech, said that if he were picking number 1 in the draft next year, he would take Kyler Murray. And then sure enough, as fate would have it, he landed with he was hired by the Arizona Cardinals, and they have the number 1 overall pick. It's interesting to see what the Cardinals are going to do here because Josh Rosen was picked 10th overall by Arizona last year. So they have this quarterback that they kind of devoted their franchise to and were trying to build around. And now they have a new coach who might want Kyler Murray because he fits better in the system. What would you do, Piano Man, if you're in Arizona's situation right now? Would you just say, hey, if Kyler Murray's the guy for the new coach, then let's take Murray? Or would you say, no, we invested in Josh Rosen last year. Let's try to build around him?
I think it's important to get the right guy, not when is the right time to get somebody. Kyler Murray is obviously a lot better than Josh Rosen, and you can believe in Rosen if you'd like to, but you can't just stick with a pick just because you took them really high. I mean, that's how so many teams get stuck in that 8-8 range for so many years, and they're just in the middle of the road with the quarterback. I mean, this is a team that needs so much more than just a quarterback. So, I mean, they could essentially take Kyler Murray. They need an edge rusher and defensive lineman. They're ranked 26th on defense and last in offense. So they could go ahead and trade Rosen for a pick and use that to get one of those type of players, and then now they're set for quarterback. But, I mean, you obviously have Kyler Murray as number 1 as just about everybody else. Do you believe that he's going to be the guy, or do you have a short list of players that they could also go with besides Murray?
I do believe the Arizona Cardinals are going to take Kyler Murray. Now, last year, keep in mind that I also thought the Browns were going to take Darnold number 1 until the day of the draft, and that changed. So you never know what can really happen. But right now, I do believe that Cardinals are pretty locked in on Murray. I think any other player that they're talking about right now is probably a smokescreen. Maybe they're trying to get San Francisco to move up for someone like Nick Bosa or something like that. I think Murray is the franchise changer that this organization needs. Josh Rosen was pretty underwhelming in his rookie year. I know that he did not have a good supporting cast, to say the least, but I think Josh Rosen is pretty much a sunk cost. You can't, like you said, I think he's irrelevant to this equation. Just because he was picked last year doesn't mean that they shouldn't take Murray this year. First of all, you can get probably a 3rd or 2nd round pick for Rosen because he is so young and he does have potential. But second, Murray he has the support of the new coaching staff. He's played in an offense similar to what the new coach is trying to implement here. And he's also just going to bring a spark to the Arizona Cardinals franchise. And, they were terrible last year. So with Rosen starting a lot of games. So I'm not going to sit here and say Rosen can't have success in the future. But I do think that quarterback's the most important position in the NFL, arguably all of sports. And Rosen's presence on the roster is not something that I think the Cardinals will deter the Cardinals from taking Kyler Murray. I have Murray all the way here.
Okay, so we've got the number 2 pick, San Francisco. They obviously need a lot too. Offense is ranked 25th and defense is 27th. They're looking for an edge rusher, defensive lineman, and wide receiver. Who do you have going second, and who's also on your short list?
I do expect Murray to be the number 1 overall pick, and I expect Nick Bosa to be the number 2 overall pick. I realize that the 49ers have invested in defensive line heavily in the last couple of drafts. They picked Solomon Thomas in round 1 2 years ago, DeForest Buckner a couple of years ago, and Eric Armstead, all first-round picks on the defensive line, and they just signed Dee Ford to a huge deal. But they still need a lot of help rushing the quarterback, which is the most important part of a defense. I think Bosa is probably the number 1 football player on their board, and I do think they'll select him there.
Yeah, I agree. I think the first 2 picks are probably going to be the easiest ones. I think it'll be a little bit muddier when you get to number 3 in the Jets.
It is.
Their
really
offensive ranked is number 30, which is 2 away from the last in the league. And then on defense, they're a little bit better at 21. They're looking for an offensive lineman, an edge rusher, and defensive lineman. Who do you have going to them as the first kind of questionable pick between all of the experts?
The New York Jets is where it gets really interesting because they could do a number of things. There's a couple of defenders here that are premier defenders. I'll be saying their names a lot in the next couple of minutes, but Quinnen Williams, at a defensive tackle out of Alabama, is seen as by a lot as the number 1 overall prospect by many teams. Ed Oliver, defensive tackle for Houston, freak athlete, and he's a guy who's risen a lot on draft boards as the process has gone on. He's just a really good player, and he is also a defensive tackle, and he's a guy that the New York Jets are reportedly high on as well. Neither of those picks, Ed Oliver or Quinnen Williams, would surprise me, and I'm not sure I'm not going to end up changing this pick. Right now I have Williams slotted in there, but I think either of those are possible for the Jets. I will say this, that if the Jets are really looking to trade down right now, and if they don't, I ultimately do think they're going to end up with Williams or Oliver. I don't think the Jets are going to surprise us with kind of an off-the-wall pick. But if they are able to trade down, which I know they want to, because remember last year they lost their second-round pick in the trade for Sam Darnold. So they're trying to coop that back up.
Yeah, and speaking of Ed Oliver, you've got him ranked number 4 in this list, and that's going to the Oakland Raiders. They're one of the most questionable picks of what are they going to trade up, they're going to trade down, are they going to look for a quarterback? Do you see your pick moving from Ed Oliver, or do you think that they're going to go in this direction?
What you're alluding to with the Raiders is, could they surprise somebody with this pick? And they really could. I'm buying the idea that the Raiders could have a surprise pick here if it's not Oliver, only because, first of all, this is the first team that really isn't set at quarterback. And I think Derek Carr, they don't really view him as their franchise quarterback. And we've talked about that on this show. He's probably entering his last year as a Raider unless he really excels this year. I don't think he's going to be going with the team to Vegas. And there's a couple of quarterback prospects here. Dwayne Haskins, they've met with him. They met with him 3 times. Drew Lock, John Gruden coached Drew Lock at the Senior Bowl, so there's a connection there. I wouldn't be totally stunned if the Raiders took a quarterback here, but I don't think it's necessarily in their best interest because I do think the defenders on the board, whether it's Quinnen Williams or even if Nick Bosa makes it or Ed Oliver, are probably better picks than the quarterbacks right now. Hey, I'm not going to be surprised by either. It's worth noting, Piano Man, that the Raiders sent all their scouts home, which is pretty rare, and there's only going to be Gruden, Mayock, and a couple of other people in the draft room. And what does that tell me? That tells me that they don't trust their scouts to not leak a pick. And it tells me a couple things. First of all, it tells me that Mike Mayock probably knows the Raiders scouts more than anybody and knows that one of them or a couple of them might be prone to leaking picks. But it also tells me that the Raiders might have a surprise in store that they don't want leaked. One of the players that comes to mind here is Devin White, because of the Buccaneers' reported interest in Devin White at 5. If the Raiders really love Devin White, then it would be wise to take all precautions not to have the Buccaneers know about this, because then the Buccaneers could jump up in front of them to the Jets, which I just said are willing to move down and want to move down. So a willing trade partner in the Jets, and the Raiders know that. So they don't want maybe a team to move up for Devin White. Maybe Devin White's a surprise pick there. Also, Dwayne Haskins is another one. I mean, teams will move up for a quarterback they love. Quarterback's so important. If the Raiders want to take their quarterback now, whether it's Drew Lock or Dwayne Haskins, then they would not want other teams to know about that, because they know that the Jets are so willing to trade down, and they would not want a team jumping in front of them to get their guy Dwayne Haskins or Drew Lock. So, yes, the Raiders absolutely could surprise us at pick 4. For now, I'm going to go with Ed Oliver, but that is subject to change.
Yeah, and speaking about Devin White, you have them going number 5 to Tampa Bay. Their defensive rank is 32, last in the league, and their first need is linebacker, edge rusher, and then on the offensive line. They need to fill a big hole with Quan Alexander now gone. It seems like this is a really easy thing to spot, but is there any chance that you could move on this pick, or is this more set in stone since their team needs?
Well, I could move on this pick if Oakland, if I figure out that Oakland might want to be taking Devin White, because then Tampa Bay might not have a chance to select him. I could also move on this pick for one of two scenarios. First of all, Quinnen Williams, if he's available. I have it on good authority, I would say, that the Buccaneers have Quinnen Williams number 1 overall on their board. Gerald McCoy, their defensive tackle, is not expected to remain with the team. He's probably going to get traded sometime during the draft. So I would argue that the Bucs even have a bigger need, even though Quan Alexander left. I would argue that they have a bigger need at defensive line than they do linebacker. But at the same time, the Bucs have shown, it's been one of the worst kept secrets in the league that the Bucs have shown their interest in Devin White. It kind of reminds me of Carolina showing so much interest in Christian McCaffrey a couple of years ago. And, you're thinking the entire time, okay, well, maybe it's just, a smokescreen or whatever. They can't be possibly that interested where everybody knows about it. But McCaffrey ended up coming true. I will say there's precaution, though, because first of all, inside linebackers don't have a big history getting drafted in the top 5 in the league. It's only happened, I think, 3 times in the last 20 years. It's also just worth noting that the Buccaneers were also reportedly extremely high on Derwin James last year. That was one of the picks that a lot of experts were very confident in at pick 7 last year. And Derwin James slid past the Bucs. The Bucs ended up trading down, and he slid all the way to the Chargers in the high teens. And so we could be getting another example of Tampa Bay just kind of fooling everybody. So, yeah, I don't think Devin White's a lock to the Bucs, but I do think it's going to take a lot for me to change that. I'm going to have it on really good authority of him not going to Tampa Bay.
Okay, and the 6th pick we have is the New York Giants. They are showing here that their team needs are obviously a quarterback. Eli Manning's on his way out either this year or the next. They need a cornerback and defensive lineman. They've lost Odell Beckham. Who do you have going number 6, and who's also on your short list for them?
I think that they are high on 2 quarterbacks in this draft. I don't believe that they are high on Dwayne Haskins. I do believe they're high on Daniel Jones, and I believe they're also high on Drew Lock. I think that they can wait for either Drew Lock or Daniel Jones to fall to 17. And if not 17, I think they might be able to move up from 17 to get them. So I'm ultimately going to say here that they're going to go defense with this first pick at pick 6 and address the quarterback situation later. The Giants are in a great spot of this draft because they can get whoever falls out of these premier elite defenders in this draft, where Quinnen Williams, Ed Oliver, Devin White, or Josh Allen. There's a pretty huge drop-off after those guys on defense. And I know the Giants, I'm fairly certain the Giants want to address the defense, particularly the defensive line with this pick. I wouldn't rule out Devin White, but I think that they would rather address the defensive line because I think they're weaker there. And I think Dave Gettleman has a history of prioritizing the team's pass rush. So I'm for right now, I'm giving them whoever falls out of that defensive foursome of Quinnen Williams, Ed Oliver, Devin White, or Josh Allen. If it's Oliver who falls, then I'll give him Oliver. If it's Devin White who falls, I'll probably end up giving them White. I think they're going to address the quarterback later.
And we've got number 7, the Jacksonville Jaguars. They have needs as well. They're pretty set on defense. I mean, they can always add a guy or two, but they're taking care of they're ranked number 31 on offense. But that is with Blake Bortles. He's now gone with Nick Foles in the mix. Their top needs are showing here for a tight end, offensive line, and edge rusher. You've got Jawan Taylor, offensive tackle from Florida. They like actually taking people from Florida and Florida State, so I think this is something that they'll probably go with. But I also see T.J. Hawkinson, who's the number 1 tight end. Do you think that this is a 50-50 ball for them, or do you think it's set with Taylor?
Look, I'm looking for the Jags to address the passing game with this pick. I think that you're either going to go for the offensive line here, where they let Jeremy Parnell, their right tackle, walk in the season. They might have been the most injured offensive line in the NFL last year. They just had so many injuries. I think 3 of their 5 starters ended up on IR. And so I know that they're going to want to solidify the offensive line. Tom Coughlin is an old school guy, and he kind of runs the show with Dave Caldwell there. They believe in establishing the run first. And, they also want to help Nick Foles, of course. Hawkinson's got great blocking prowess. He's able to help in the running game as well. But ultimately, I'm leaning towards offensive line in the first round because, A, I think offensive line is a much more valuable position than tight end. And B, I think that this tight end class is so deep that I think they're going to be able to get a pretty solid tight end with their early pick in round 2. So I'm going Jawan Taylor here, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to stick with that unless people really persuade me throughout the process. That's a pick that I'm pretty confident in.
Yeah, and you've got Hawkinson going next anyway to Detroit.
Right.
They're in need of somebody to replace their former tight end who went off for about 13 touchdowns last season. So they could use a guy like the one that they didn't want to re-sign. But they also need linebackers and defensive linemen and cornerbacks. They're kind of in the middle of the pack toward the back end. Do you think T.J. Hawkinson can really do anything to move the needle for the Lions?
One of the reasons that I have T.J. Hawkinson here is because the Lions have not been shy about stating their needs in the offseason as kind of wanting to revamp their tight end room. And Matt Patricia even said that the Lions want 2 new tight ends in the beginning of the offseason. And he brought one in, Jesse James from the Steelers, but he's more of a blocker type. He's got great size at 6'7", and he's going to be utilized more of an inline tight end. Hawkinson is also an extremely good blocker. I'm not going to say it moves the needle for the Lions because I don't envision them making the playoffs this year, regardless who they pick here. But I do think Hawkins is going to help out Stafford a lot. When Stafford lost Golden Tate in a midseason trade, he didn't really have that middle of the field target that Stafford really likes to have and is comfortable with. So I'm going with Hawkinson here, but it's not necessarily just because the Lions have a need at tight end. It's also because I think it's smart strategy to put Hawkinson in this range because if you're judging mock drafts based on any sort of accuracy where you're getting any type of points for selecting players near the right pick or if they're 1 or 2 off the right picks, look at the teams around the Lions. The Jaguars could really use Hockenson, and they might take him like we just discussed. And then the Bills at 9 also could really use T.J. Hockenson. And I could also see Hockenson going to the Denver Broncos at 10. So this is just kind of a nice range for T.J. Hockenson. So even if I didn't really think that the Detroit was really smitten with him, which I'm not really sure that they are, I think that this is a good range to have, or a good pick to have Hockenson in, because I think you might end up getting partial credit if it's near the right pick, if a team like Buffalo or Denver takes him. If he's not taken by the Lions, I look for the Lions to maybe move back and take an offensive lineman, a guy like Jonah Williams, a guy like Jawan Taylor, if the Jaguars don't take him at 7. Those are guys that I think the Lions would be interested in. Also, the Lions, Matt Patricia is a defensive line type of guy. Rashawn Gary, Montez Sweat, those are 2 other names to keep an eye as dark horses for the Lions.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about Buffalo. They're next on the list at number 9 here. Their needs are offensive linemen, edge rushing, and defensive line, so just line heavy. On defense, they're actually okay. They're middle of the pack at 15, but on offense, they're at 29th. So they really need some help, protecting Josh Allen, who's shown a little bit of promise. I mean, he can run the ball a little bit, and he's obviously a great passer, but he needs somebody to go ahead and protect him. So you got Jonah Williams from Alabama, and, Alabama's been known to have some great offensive linemen in the recent drafts. You think this is where they're going?
I think that they would prefer Jawan Taylor. And I would even argue that they might prefer T.J. Hockenson. But for here and for now, I have Jonah Williams here with Alabama. I think it's a nice, safe pick. I don't think Jonah Williams has, I would say, I guess he's got all-pro potential, but I don't think he has Hall of Fame potential or anything like that. I don't even think that he might be – I don't even really believe that he's going to be the best offensive lineman from this draft class. However – the Bills, like you said, they like to protect their investment in Josh Allen. I think that Jonah Williams is a pretty good run blocker, and he's got versatility too. They can play him in either guard or offensive tackle, and you could argue the Bills have a need for both. So, I can see the Bills really going offensive line here. And you were right. This is a team that also needs defensive linemen. Their defense was pretty good last year, and it has been underrated, I would say, in the past 2 or 3 seasons. However, with Kyle Williams retiring and with Jerry Hughes, their best pass rusher, he's entering a contract year. So with those situations in play, I really think that the Buffalo Bills may be interested in a guy like Rashawn Gary if they're tantalized by his athleticism. And also, I want to say that if there's any team that's going to move up into the top 6 and take one of those 4 elite defensive prospects we talked about, Quinnen Williams, Josh Allen, or Ed Oliver, I don't think they would do it for Devin White because they just took a linebacker last year. But if it's one of those 3 defensive linemen, if there's any team that's going to move up and kind of surprise folks and take one of them, I do think the Bills are kind of the team to do that.
The last team in the top 10 is Denver. Obviously, they've made a move to go get Flacco this year. He's not the future of the team. They need somebody to run the offense right now with with the group that they've got. You've got Drew Lock from Missouri, the quarterback there.
Right.
I've seen a lot of people put him early and late. To me, he seems like he has the best boom or bust potential. Do you think this is a good pick, taking a quarterback in the middle of this first round who's not Kyler Murray or Dwayne Haskins?
Well, one of the arguments to take Locke is what you just said, that he might have the highest upside, with the exception of Kyler Murray, I would say. I think that Drew Lock has a way higher upside than Dwayne Haskins, and probably way more upside than Daniel Jones as well. He also has a big downside. Like you said, he's one of the riskier picks, and I think that's why you're kind of seeing him all over the board in mock drafts. A lot of guys that, of people's drafts that I trust have him late in the 20s, to be honest. I think his floor is probably San Diego. Not San Diego, Los Angeles Chargers there at 29. But that would be the absolute floor, and even then I think they would trade up to get him. But To answer your question directly, I think that anytime you have Joe Flacco as your quarterback, yes, I think it's probably a good idea to take a quarterback early in the draft. Could they take a guy like Devin Bush, linebacker, or I know for certain they would take Ed Oliver or Devin White if they were to surprisingly be available at pick 10. To me, it really comes down to Dwayne Haskins or Drew Lock with that outside shot of T.J. Hawkinson. But to me, it comes down to Drew Lock or Dwayne Haskins, and it's tough to say right now who I think the Broncos are leaning towards. Obviously, I'm leaning towards Lock there, but it's possible I could change my pick to Haskins because it's just tough to get a read on what the Broncos really want to do. So this is a pick that certainly could change, but ultimately, unless Ed Oliver or Devin White are not on the board, and especially if T.J. Hawkinson is gone, I do think this pick comes down to either Devin Bush or quarterback.
Yeah, well, speaking of underachieving quarterbacks in the AFC North, the Bengals and Andy Dalton are looking for a couple of new pieces to go along. Their offense is actually ranked number 14th, which I was surprised at, but their defense is just terrible at 31. I think it's good that they got rid of, or they let Vontaze Burfict go. I think it was about time. You have Devin Bush going. He's the number 2 linebacker. I know that I've seen some people in the Bengals really want Devin White, but he's obviously not going to fall that far down. Is he the next best thing behind Devin White as the second Devin on the list for linebackers?
Yeah, actually, I think one of the reason that Devin White and Devin Bush are going to go higher than most inside linebackers go in normal years, is because there is a massive drop-off in the linebacker position after Devin Bush, all the way down to the potential third round, or maybe late second, but probably third round with Mack Wilson, the linebacker out of Alabama. It is a very steep drop-off, and Wilson has a lot of limitations that Bush and Devin White don't. White and Bush are every down players. You can play them on passing downs. They can blitz. They can cover. They can tackle. They can do everything, and they're very athletic. I think that even though inside linebackers aren't really prioritized in the top 10 normally, because of the drop-off, because teams that need a linebacker better pick them early, and the Bengals desperately need a linebacker. The defense allowed 7.9 yards per attempt, was one of the worst ratings in the league. They were 28th in sacks. You can make the argument they need a defensive lineman. You can make the argument they need an offensive lineman. But like you said, the Bengals' offense isn't terrible, and despite Andy Dalton, and they were also pretty injured last year. So I think that this pick is going to go defense, and even though I wouldn't be shocked if Drew Lock or Dwayne Haskins is a surprise pick here, I think ultimately the Bengals are, who are gashed in the second level by running backs and tight ends this year. Ultimately, I think Devin Bush is probably the best pick for this team.
Yeah, I agree. And, I see Green Bay right there at number 12. They're always going to be good on offense as long as Aaron Rodgers is around and not injured for the season. But their defense is ranked 22. They're looking for a linebacker, defensive line, and safety, all defensive guys. But you've actually got Andre Dillard from Washington State, an offensive tackle. So you think that they're actually going to go on offense when they have a big need for defensive players?
I think that's just kind of how the board fell here. I don't think the Packers necessarily want to go offense more, but that's just kind of what you're looking at here. I think that the only defender I could see them really taking here is Devin Bush, which would be a pretty good pick for Green Bay, and I have no doubt that Green Bay needs an inside linebacker to pair with Blake Martinez. However, there just seems like there's going to be more available talent on the offensive side of the ball, and I think Green Bay is ultimately going to take the best player available. I think that Green Bay really wants T.J. Hawkinson, and if this is his floor, in my opinion. If T.J. Hawkins is not on the board, offensive line is something that the Green Bay Packers need to address. Aaron Rodgers took too many sacks last year, and he led the league in throwaways last year. And, I could see them with all the injuries that Rodgers has had. I could see Green Bay wanting to, protect them, especially with Brian Bulaga in a contract year. I could see them wanting to kind of shore up that offensive line there. So if it's not TJ Hawkinson, I am kind of expecting Green Bay to go O-line here. And I sound like I'm beating, a dead horse here, but I do think that ultimately you might notice in my mock draft compared to most, I have the offensive lineman going a lot higher than other analysts do. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. I think the main thing you're seeing is that offensive line, there's a really shortage of good offensive line talent in the NFL. That's the first reason. The second reason is this is a pretty good offensive line class. I mean, there's a lot more talented players at the top of the draft than normal. And there's not a lot of good skill positions out there, and there's especially not a lot of good cornerbacks here. These offensive linemen could be taken over skill positions or cornerbacks that normally would be taken here. And lastly, I mean, have you seen the offensive linemen's contracts in free agency? These guys are paid so much now. Even average or below average starters are paid a fortune now. It pays to be an offensive lineman in this league right now. And if you can get these offensive tackles in a cheap 4-year contract on the rookie wage scale, that's a huge advantage that you have over other teams, because once they get free agency, if they're any way halfway decent, they are going to be paid a king's ransom.
Yeah, and Mel Kiper, I looked at his list. He's got him at number 23, so big difference in that. So we'll see how that ends up.
Wow. Yeah, I don't think Andre Dillard is going to fall past Carolina at 16. I think that Carolina is. I'm not going to say there's always a way in the draft, but I think there's no way I could really envision Carolina with Andre Dillard on the board passing on him at 16. So I disagree with that assessment of him getting to the 20s. I will say this, since we're talking about Dillard right now, pretty interesting that the Houston Texans at 23 are, and I don't know if that's who Mel Kiper mocked him to, but the Houston Texans are, okay, see, that makes more sense. I think that he's probably trying to go for the team, the right team here. The Houston Texans are rumored to be extremely high on Andre Dillard, one of their top 10 overall players. The Texans are also desperate at offensive tackle. So could we see the Texans trade up to get Dillard? Yes, absolutely. And in that case, even though I'm criticizing Mel Kiper here, in that case, he's going to get the pick right, and everybody else is going to get it wrong, even though he had it at 23, and there's virtually no way Dillard's going to last at 23 because he's going to match the team right. So, but again, I think that it's smarter money it's not smart money to try to predict trade ups unless it's really that obvious. And I think the Texans are going to try to sit back and wait and see how the offensive linemen are coming off the board before they try to make a move like that.
All right, and moving on, we have number 13 as Miami. Obviously, they need a quarterback, but we all believe that they're probably looking at that next year. So for this season, you've got them listed with Christian Wilkins from Clemson, defensive tackle. What do you think about this guy from the championship team? What does he bring to that organization, and is that exactly what they need? Well,
they have the new coach, Brian Flores, he was the linebackers coach at New England, and he is going to probably want a defender with this pick, if I had to say. You can make a case for offensive linemen, and if Dillard's on the board, if Jonah Williams is on the board especially, or Jaywan Taylor, I could easily see them being the pick. I don't think they're as high on the last offensive lineman of the Big Four, Cody Ford, so I think if Williams, Taylor, and Dillard are off the board, I'm going to go defense here, and I'm going to go defensive line specifically. I think it's either going to be Christian Wilkins, Rashawn Gary, or Brian Burns. And you just mentioned it, actually, and I don't know if you meant to, but you alluded to it. I think that one of the reasons they might end up with Wilkins is because Brian Flores is looking for when you have a tanking team, you're looking for leaders, future team leaders. And I think that Christian Wilkins is a very clean prospect, very safe in terms of safe on the field and off the field. He's got very high character reviews. So I think he will attract Miami, a rebuilding Miami team that needs leaders and building blocks to a guy like Christian Wilkins. To be honest with you, Piano Man, the other reason that I'm having Wilkins go to Miami is because the other team that I could see taking Wilkins is actually Atlanta right here, and this is another one of these partial bet strategy picks right here to where I want to put Wilkins around this range right here because I do think that I don't know who's going to take him out of Miami or Atlanta, but if they stay pat, I do think that one of either Miami or Atlanta will take Wilkins. And again, I don't know who it is going to be. I don't know who, but that's where my bet is. So if I don't hit on the Miami pick taking Wilkins, I want to at least be able to get some partial credit on some accuracy drafts, knowing that he would be one pick away if the Falcons take him here.
Yeah, we've got the Falcons. Speaking of them, at number 14, the Dirty Birds are looking for a tight end, offensive line, and cornerback. They could definitely use all of those positions. We make no bones about it. We're Saints fans, and we hope that this pick misses at all costs. But if we're thinking objectively, they're number 30 on defense. But you've got them as an offensive tackle, particularly on the right-hand side. Do you think Cody Ford is who they need and who they're going for?
They were 30 on defense, but it's important for Saints fans especially to remember that one of the reasons they were so poor on defense last year was they had a ton of injuries. Keanu Neal, got hurt in the first week of the season. He missed the entire season. Deion Jones missed games last year. He went on IR early in the season as well. Those are two leaders for the Falcons defense right there. And they also had some defensive line injuries as well. So I'm not going to sit here and say the Falcons need defense more than offense. They obviously don't. I'm not going to say they need offense more than defense. They obviously don't. Defense is obviously the priority here for Atlanta, and I'm sure the majority of the picks will be defense. But remember what I'm saying about the offensive line being just such a priority position for every team, really. I think that they are very underrated by analysts all around who are kind of underselling how high these offensive linemen are going to go. And Cody Ford is kind of the last one, I would say, out of the big four potential offensive tackles that will go in this first round. And the Falcons do have a gaping hole at right tackle or I would say it's open to competition because Ryan Schrader has not gotten the job done the last 2 years. So, Cody Ford's also somebody who's versatile enough to slide into right guard, which they were horrible at an offensive guard position last year. So this is somewhere it's still a need, but I do tend to agree with you that no one should be surprised if Atlanta just takes the best available defender here.
Okay, and number 15, we've got the Washington Redskins. They need quite a bit on offense, wide receiver and a quarterback, obviously. You've got them going with Dwayne Haskins at this time. We really don't know about the extent of Alex Smith's injury. I'm sure he's going to be on the PUP list this year. He may not even play with the injury that he's had. What's your thoughts about Haskins finally making the list here in the first round at the midpoint?
Well, if Haskins lasts till 15, I'll be pretty stunned. I'm not sure where the Redskins would try to trade up to, but ultimately I think Haskins is going to go much higher than 15. Now, I will say this. I don't think he's going top 6 like a lot of analysts think. I think once you get kind of like Detroit on the board at 8, not saying he's going to Detroit, of course, but Detroit's going to be that first team that really, really wants to move down outside of the top 6, outside of the top 8. So I think that the other reason I think Detroit is a key team there, besides their interest in trading down, is I also think that teams will want to jump Denver and Cincinnati if they covet Dwayne Haskins, because Denver could easily take Dwayne Haskins, and they pick at 10. So ultimately, I kind of see the Redskins maybe making a trade with the Detroit Lions potentially, and going up there and getting Dwayne Haskins. There's a lot of connections here for Dwayne Haskins. Dan Snyder, the owner's son, went to the same high school as Haskins in Maryland. There's local ties here. If they don't take Haskins, maybe they end up with somebody like Josh Rosen from the Cardinals. A trade that I've seen floated around a lot is the Redskins trade their second-round pick and Case Keenum for Josh Rosen. And that way Case Keenum's able to start in Arizona, and kind of Kyler Murray's not thrown into the Wolves immediately. and Case Keenum has a history playing in Cliff Kingsbury's system. So that trade makes a lot of sense to me. If not, I wouldn't be surprised if the Redskins took Dwayne Haskins, Drew Lock, or Daniel Jones here. But I think Haskins is their preferred guy. And if they don't take Haskins here, I'm thinking wide receiver here, maybe DK Metcalf or Marquise Brown.
Yeah, and I've got you here at number 16 with Carolina, going with Brian Burns. He's a edge rusher from Florida State. Obviously, there's questions about if Cam Newton's even going to play, so this year might even be a wash for them. They're ranked 25th on defense, so it would be good for them to go ahead and get an edge rusher or a safety in this draft. So do you think that's where they're going, is going for an edge rusher to shore up that defense?
Yeah, it's either going to be edge rusher or offensive lineman. And like I said, I think that Andre Dillard is their primary choice. But if he's not available, which I don't expect him to be, I think Brian Burns will likely be the pick here. The only variable I could kind of see here is Montez Sweat. I think he would be tempting for Carolina. And we haven't talked about him yet. He has a heart condition. He was seen as a top 10 pick overall until at the combine he was medically red flagged with a heart condition. Hey, there are some experts that are going to put Montez Sweat, in the top 10, maybe to a team like Detroit. There are some experts that are going to even put him not in the first round at all. And most of them, I would say, are going to squeeze him into the 20s with a team that they're not very familiar on who they're going to take, maybe like the Steelers or something. But for me, I'm not in the business of trying to predict which teams have Montez Sweat on their board and which teams don't have him on their board because of the heart condition. That is kind of an impossible task to predict. So I'm not even going to try to make that prediction. So I've left Montez Sweat out of my first round completely. However, I wouldn't be surprised if Carolina is one of those teams that may feel that the risk of Montez Sweat the reward outweighs the risk and could take him here. Otherwise, it's either Andre Dillard, Brian Burns, Christian Wilkins, or Garrett Bradbury for this pick. We talk about, I talk about certain teams that have a good feel for their interest in what players they're interested in. Carolina is one of those teams that I have more confidence in. If I were to rate all the teams by confidence in their picks, Carolina would be high up there. I think that I'm pretty sound by saying that they want either Andre Dillard or Brian Burns. The trickiest part is predicting, I would say, if Dillard's going to be available or if they're going to trade up for Dillard.
Yeah, and just to kind of rebuff on the Montez Sweat situation, there was an article posted about 3 hours ago on Yahoo that he's not even attending the draft. And,
right. I think that's a bad sign.
That's a big sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a bad sign, and it's sad to see because he's a great player. And ultimately, he is going to get taken, maybe at the end of round one, I would guess. Could be even higher. I mean, once Detroit gets on the board at 8, I think that's when his absolute ceiling is. I could see Detroit taking him. Hey, I've mentioned Detroit as a team that, had interest in Montez Sweat in the past. I just don't know how he's going to check out medically. But I mentioned Detroit as a team that wanted to move down. Hey, they could trade down and take Montez Sweat later in the teens, if he's still available. So it's not doomsday for Sweat, but I could see a fall out of the first round. I wouldn't be surprised. But I don't think he's going to go any further than outside like the top 40 overall.
So what you're saying is he's going to be sweating it?
Yeah. If he were to attend the draft, he could have been sweating it, but ultimately, I don't. If he doesn't get taken in round one, I don't think he'll be sweating long on day 2.
Okay, and we've got number 17 here, the New York Giants. They're obviously looking for a quarterback. This is their second pick of the first round. You've got them going to your favorite little college over there in North Carolina. Daniel Jones, quarterback. He would be the third quarterback, or is this the fourth quarterback?
Fourth quarterback taking in the round.
Fourth quarterback.
I do think 4 quarterbacks will be taken in the top 20. I'm fairly confident on that. Even if Denver doesn't take Drew Lock, I think either the Redskins or the Chargers or somebody like that will move up for Drew Lock. And I'm pretty confident, and the Giants might even take Drew Lock. Like I said, I think the Giants are very high on Lock and Daniel Jones. I do think that Daniel Jones is the number 1 quarterback on their board, though, even ahead of Kyler Murray and ahead of Dwayne Haskins. I know that might be surprising to some, but I'm buying the rumors there because Daniel Jones is, a large group of higher-ups were sent to Duke's Pro Day, and that was during the NFL owners' meetings. Daniel Jones and Eli Manning know each other. They have the same personality, mannerisms, and playing style. They've worked with the same quarterback coach before, and Eli's kind of been his mentor throughout this process. So all the writing is on the wall that, Daniel Jones is the coveted quarterback for the Giants, although I don't think, like some analysts do, I don't think that the Giants are going to take quarterback at pick 6. I think they're going to try to wait and sweat it out and see if either Drew Lock or Daniel Jones is available at 17.
All right, and we've got Minnesota at number 18. Their needs are offensive line, tight end, and defensive linemen. They're actually ranked number 2 on defense overall, but offense, they're ranked number 23. You've got Garrett Bradbury from North Carolina State. What position does he play, and how is he going to help his team?
Garrett Bradbury is an offensive guard, and he's kind of from a college that really hasn't looked too much to football in NC State, but he's a heck of a player, and I do think he'll be a first-round pick, even though a lot of people haven't really heard of him. Especially, most fans who were watching the draft probably will not heard of him. The Vikings have a huge need, arguably more than anybody, on the offensive line. I think the Vikings will take 2 offensive linemen in their first 4 draft picks because I think they have so many needs along the line. And they are just hoping and praying that Cody Ford, Jaywan Taylor, Jonah Williams, or Andre Dillard fall to them. I don't see it happening. And so I see them kind of picking into the next litter of offensive linemen, which is here it's either Garrett Bradbury or Chris Lindstrom, the guard out of Boston College.
Yeah, and we've got number 19 on the list now for Tennessee, right in the middle of the pack. They're actually looking at the first wide receiver, according to your lineup here, for a Marquise Brown out of Oklahoma. Why is he the first wide receiver off the board for you here?
I think Marquise Brown is a really interesting player because not only is he probably the best receiver in the draft, but he also had a foot injury that's going to make him questionable for week 1. So teams are going to have to take that into account. Another reason he's interesting is that he only weighed in 166 pounds, and he would be one of the smallest successful receivers to come out in quite some time. So, even way smaller actually than guy like, deep threats we commonly know to be small, like Deshaun Jackson or T.Y. Hilton. That's who he's kind of compared to. But Marquise Brown's even smaller. It's going to be interesting to see how teams kind of slight him based on his height and based on his foot injury. However, I do think ultimately he's going to be the first receiver to go in round 1. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's the only receiver to go in round 1. And the Titans, he works so well for them because he's a perfect complement for Corey Davis. They had nobody once Delaney Walker got hurt last year. They had nobody who could step up as a pass catcher after Delaney Walker and after Corey Davis, who Davis himself has been inconsistent as a pro. So I think if Marquise Brown, if he's not the pick here, I know the Titans are another team that I'm very confident in. Their interest. I think that Brian Burns is their coveted player, and if he's not there, I think Christian Wilkins is the guy that they want. And if those two are not available, which I don't expect them to be, I think this pick will either be Marquise Brown or Jerry Tillery or maybe Rashawn Gary.
So why do you think Marquise Brown would go ahead of DK Metcalf and A.J. Brown as the first wide receiver?
Hey, that's a great question. The reason is because Marquise Brown is basically a better football player. I know it sounds simple, but DK Metcalf is a workout warrior who tested really well He's a 97th percentile athlete in the SPARQ score. But he also he's extremely fast and he's extremely built and strong and he's a beast. But he's not as quick as you would want him to be. His acceleration is not as quick as you would want him to be. And his agility, his ability to make cuts and change directions is not as quick as we saw in the 3-cone drill and the short shuttle there at the combine. I think that the media is a little higher on DK Metcalf than NFL teams actually are. And I think we're going to see that on draft day. Could Metcalf go in the first round? Yeah, maybe in the late 20s or maybe early 30s. But I have him as early day 2 pick. But I just think Marquise Brown is a much better football player. I think he's going to be the best receiver in this draft class.
All right, and number 20, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers, offense number 6, defense number 17. So, they did lose Le'Veon Bell, which they already lost last year, and then Antonio Brown's going to be gone. I still think they're going to be good on offense with Juju Smith-Schuster and the backup running back now becoming the starter. But they do need some defensive players. They could honestly use any LSU player, cornerback, linebacker, edge rusher. You've got them going with the guy you've been talking about, Rashawn Gary from Michigan. Is he the best available player for what they need?
When I do a mock draft, I don't go picks 1 and then pick 2 and then pick 3 and then pick based on who's available. That's not a smart way to be accurate because you want to start your mock draft with your picks that you're most confident in. For example, some of the first picks that I made in my mock draft were actually, Carolina's pick and the Washington Redskins and the Miami Dolphins, Atlanta Falcons. There are certain picks that I'm pretty confident in, that my confidence level is high, and there are certain picks that I just really have no idea what these teams are going to do. So it's about putting who you think is a player who's going to be picked around that right range and who matches their interests and their scheme and team needs and everything like that. Obviously, the Steelers have a need at edge rusher, so it makes sense for Rashawn Gary. But to be brutally honest, I don't think Rashawn Gary will probably make it to 20. He's a guy who's a freak athlete. I think he could go, honestly, in the wildest scenario, think he can go as high as pick 4 overall. But I don't think he's going to last any further than Seattle. And if he were to drop for whatever reason, maybe it's the injury history, maybe it's because he wasn't as productive in college as he should have been based on his athleticism, I think that he'll be picked around this range like the Tennessee Titans or the Seattle Seahawks. I don't think he will go any further than the Seahawks at 21.
All right, we've got number 21, the Seattle Seahawks. They're looking at all defensive players, cornerbacks, defensive linemen, edge rushers. They're actually number 7 on defense, but they may be losing some pieces on that team. You've got Byron Murphy as a cornerback who you believe is going there. Nick, when have they ever drafted a good defensive back?
Well, Richard Sherman was a good one, and Cam Chancellor was a good one, but it has been a while. The Seattle Seahawks are trying to reform the Legion of Boom, if you will, and they don't really have much in the defensive backfield right now. We're not really seeing any premier players there. To be blunt, I think if Rashawn Gary's here, I think he hits his floor here, but this is just kind of a guess between the best defensive backs available. They've shown some interest in Byron Murphy. I personally think that Murphy is probably the best cornerback on the board, even better than Greedy Williams. I think he'll turn out to be a better pro than Williams is. And I have Jonathan Abram there as a potential prospect because I think Abram's the best safety. So I'm not really sure exactly where they're going to go corner or safety because they need both. But to me, Seattle's pick, this is a pick that I expect them to move if Rashawn Gary's not there. This is a pick that I expect them to trade down from. So it's just difficult when when you're pretty sure a team is going to trade down, like maybe closer to 30, it's especially difficult to project them with a pick. And I think it's possible that Byron Murphy he could go late in the 20s where Seattle wants to trade down from. So I could see this being the pick there.
Number 22, we have the Baltimore Ravens. They've got a few needs on their team, but they're actually pretty decent. On offense is number 12 with the addition of Lamar Jackson this past year, and then they're still number 5 on defense. They're still finding a way to get it done after 20 years. You've got them going with Jalen Ferguson from our home state of Louisiana at LA Tech. You believe they're actually going to be trading down this pick. Why do you believe that?
I do. I think Seattle and Baltimore are two of the most likely teams to trade down. It's mainly because each of them don't have a second-round pick. And when teams don't have a second-round pick, especially in a deep draft class like this where there's going to be a bunch of good players available in the 50s and 40s, I think that basically it really incentivizes teams to move down if they can find a taker. Baltimore's probably going to be one of those teams because they have multiple needs to address. I could see offensive line going here. Garrett Bradbury, Chris Lindstrom are guys, especially, maybe even Eric McCoy. That would kind of be a reach. But Garrett Bradbury and Chris Lindstrom are guys I could easily see Baltimore taking. But there's also a glaring need at pass rusher. I mean, they lost Adarius Smith. They lost Terrell Suggs. And Baltimore has met with Jalen Ferguson 3 times, which is a lot for a team. And that shows that they're at least very interested in him. I think Jalen Ferguson is more likely to be picked a little lower than this. So I could see that this is another thing like Seattle where you're kind of trying to project Baltimore a player that you think is probably going to be there in the late 20s as well as maybe 22. So that's kind of the reason that I have – one of the reasons that I have Jalen Ferguson there to Baltimore.
Yeah, I could also see DK Metcalf going at this spot. I mean –
yeah, they need a wide receiver for sure.
Baltimore, I mean, when have they really had, like, superstars on offense? I mean, Lamar Jackson's not there yet, but he showed, a lot of people wanting to come out and see their offense for the first time in a long time. And then you add DK Metcalf, and for the first time in maybe their history, they have 2 of the most athletic people at the positions that they've never really had it at.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Metcalf wouldn't surprise me at all here. I think that they would try to trade down and get him, though. I don't think Metcalf's going to go as high as 22.
Okay, so we did talk about number 23 earlier, but Houston, we have a few different needs here for them. So for the Texans, they're looking for an offensive lineman, like you talked about, defensive line, and they also could use a cornerback. They're actually right there and close to the top 10 for both defense and offense. You've got them going with LSU's Greedy Williams, who was projected as a top 10 player, even top 5 in some mocks earlier. You've had him, as high as, in the top 10, and now you've got him all the way lower towards 30 almost. How's he really fallen off?
It wouldn't shock me if Greedy Williams is not taken in round 1 at all. And I know that's surprising to a lot of local fans here. But Greedy Williams, it just seems like he was rated a lot higher by the media than he is by actual NFL teams. And it's not like he's done anything wrong during the offseason to really hurt his stock. I mean, he had a great 40 time. He measured in great at 6'2". It's just one of those things where this defensive back class is just not very promising. And Greedy Williams, while he had a dominant freshman year and he showed a lot of promise in man-to-man coverage, it just seems like there's also a lot of teams that have more need for offensive linemen, which is kind of pushing him down, for pass rushers, which is kind of pushing him down. That's where the strength of the draft is, with the defense and offensive linemen. And with quarterbacks, we've already had 4 go. So out of all the offensive linemen go and out of all the defensive linemen go, it's kind of speaks to how strong the class is. It's not necessarily that Greedy Williams is terrible. He's not terrible, but ultimately I think teams kind of view him a little lower than some of the key guys in the trenches for this draft class. But the Texans have a big need for defensive back, especially cornerback, and they need some speed on that defense. So I don't think Greedy Williams will be their first choice. I think they like Andre Dillard more. I think they like Cody Ford more. I think they even like Jalen Ferguson more. But Greedy Williams or Darnell Savage or DeAndre Baker, those are the kind of guys that I could see the Texans falling into if all the good offensive linemen are off the board. Offensive line should be their priority.
Yeah, and we've got number 24 next at the Oakland Raiders with their second pick of the draft. We've obviously stated their needs is pretty heavy on defense, even on offense too. You've got them going here with an edge rusher. Is that Clelin Ferrell?
Yeah,
from Clemson.
Yeah, and he is a guy that I could easily see going to Baltimore, and I could also see him. I can see him going as high as number 17 to the Giants if they don't take a quarterback there. He's somebody who should go after Brian Burns, but this is right around the sweet spot for Ferrell, and I think that the Raiders have shown a lot of interest in Ferrell. And they also have a huge need for defensive end. I mean, they ranked dead last in sacks last year and in QB hits, and they have a league high. They allowed a league high 8.2 yards per attempt, which is a passing stat. They need defensive line desperately. Arden Key from LSU is actually their best defensive lineman, and he only had 1 sack last year. So, and he's one of the only defensive linemen on their roster right now. So, Oakland easily needs defensive end, so I think they're probably going to take I have them taking the best defensive end available here.
Okay, and we're moving on to number 25 on the Big Easy Sports Talk mock draft for 2019. We've got the Philadelphia Eagles. You've got them going with offensive guard from Boston College, Chris Lindstrom.
Jason Peters is going to retire, but they lost Brandon Brooks to an Achilles injury. I mean, he'll play if he's healthy, but they lost Brandon Brooks to an Achilles injury, and that's one of the reasons that Chris Lindstrom makes sense here. Hey, the Eagles have been reportedly high on running back Josh Jacobs too, who could be the only running back going in this first round. And this is kind of right around the sweet spot for Jacobs. I would say this 25th pick because teams like Oakland could want Josh Jacobs. The Eagles at Oakland picks 24 and 27. The Colts could use a running back like Josh Jacobs, and they've had him in for a visit or two. And the Eagles have had Josh Jacobs in for a visit, and they've been interested in him as well. So this 24 through 27 range, it almost makes me want to mock Josh Jacobs in the middle there to try to at least get some partial points, because if you mock him at the very end, he ends up going to, like, let's say I mock him Josh Jacobs at 27, and then the Eagles take him at 25. That's 2 picks away, but, I could be 1 pick away if I mock him at Indianapolis or the Eagles. So it's tough there, but I do think the 24 to 27 range is right for Josh Jacobs. He'll be a prospect there. Chris Lindstrom, this is just based on rumor and need. I've heard that the Eagles are interested in Lindstrom. They send a large contingency over to his pro day to watch him work out. So this is kind of matching rumor with need, and that's kind of what I do a lot for these late round picks, where you can't really predict what's going to happen. So you kind of you rely more on what you've heard there rather than what maybe makes the most sense. But this pick does make sense for the Eagles.
Yep, and we've got at number 26. Nick, I've got a quick quiz for you, and we can see if you know this answer.
Okay, let's hear it.
There's only 3 teams that have both their offense and defense ranked in the top 10. The first 2 are San Diego.
I was just about
Seattle.
to say San Diego. I wouldn't. Oh, you mean Los Angeles Chargers?
Everyone thinks it's San Diego still.
So to be honest,
so does their attendance. But
I was under the impression that Los Angeles was the only team that was ranked in the top 10 for both. Seattle surprises me because from a defensive perspective, to be honest. I didn't think their defense was that good last year. But I'm guessing the third answer is Indianapolis, because that their offense has hit it. Their defense really overwhelmed last year. And, well, first of all, is that right, or are you trying to trick me up here?
Both, but you got it right. It's in the Indianapolis Colts is number 4 offense and number 9 defense.
So I wouldn't. To be honest, if you didn't bring up the quiz now on the Colts 26th pick, I wouldn't have got it right. I would have just said Los Angeles, and I don't even know who I would have guessed for the other teams. But The Colts, it doesn't shock me that you're saying it because the Colts did have a defense that really overwhelmed. I wouldn't say overwhelmed. I would say they play higher than their expectations based on their talent. But GM Chris Ballard isn't going to let that deter him from taking a defensive player. They've already added Justin Houston as a pass rusher. And I think ultimately here they're going to go with the best available defender regardless of position. And that's probably going to come at defensive back or defensive lineman. I could see Josh Jacobs at this pick. I could see receiver A.J. Brown for this pick, who I know the Colts are high on. But ultimately, I'm going to side with the best available defender. I'm not very confident that it's Jonathan Abram, who I have the safety from Mississippi State going right now. That pick is subject to change. But, they could go Darnell Savage there. They could go Jalen Ferguson. They could go Jerry Tillery. They could go Dexter Lawrence. There's a lot of guys they could take. But ultimately, best available defender for this team, despite their 9th-ranked defense.
All right, and number 27, we're back to Oakland again, old familiar face.
Yeah.
You've finally got them going with Josh Jacobs as a running back from Alabama. The only and first running back on the board for not just yourself, but almost every board that I've ever seen this year has only had maybe one, at most two running backs, and they've barely made the top, the first round of each round. Why are running backs not doing too well this year?
I think one of the biggest contentions among mock drafters is whether to put Josh Jacobs in the first round at all, to where you have 0 running backs in the first round, or you have Jacobs. And I'm leaning towards having him in the first round just because I think at some point, some team around these 20s is going to want a skill position. There's been so many offensive, defensive linemen drafted that at some point this run for defensive backs and skill positions like wide receivers and running backs and tight ends is going to start. And I think it's going to be in the late 20s. I've heard Oakland's pretty high on Josh Jacobs. To answer your question directly, I think it's just because it's just a bad class for running backs. There's no really other reason to say it. Josh Jacobs is seen as the number 1 running back in this class, but even he would be probably the 3rd or 4th ranked running back in most draft classes. But you have the Raiders here that have, according to my mock, they're probably going to draft a defensive end or defensive lineman with their 4th overall pick. And then I also have them going defensive line for their 24th overall pick because it's that much of a need. So now I kind of have them getting creative. They have the flexibility to get creative on their 27th overall pick. And that's right, folks, they have 3 first-round picks. And that's what you get for trading Mari Cooper and Khalil Mack. But anyway, here I think the 2 offensive players they're going to be high on are Marquise Brown, the receiver. Now keep in mind, Brown is Antonio Brown's cousin. So if, that would be pretty cool for the Raiders to draft Antonio Brown's cousin and have Antonio kind of mentor him. And Josh Jacobs is also, a potential pick here because there's just a huge need at running back. We don't know what to expect with Marshawn Lynch. They signed Isaiah Crowell, but neither Lynch nor Crowell have any receiving chops whatsoever. And the Raiders need somebody other than Jalen Richard who's going to be, a guy for the future who can also play on passing downs. So Josh Jacobs, I would say anywhere between picks 24 and 27. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't even go in the first round.
And at number 28, we have the Los Angeles Chargers, not the San Diego Chargers. You've got them going here with Dexter Lawrence, the other defensive tackle for Clemson. That's pretty good when you have 2 defensive tackles from the same team going in the top 30. That's you've got a pretty good defense if you've got 2 going in the first round.
I mean, not to state the obvious here, but this is even more true this year. Normally, you're going to have plenty of players picked from national championship teams, but Alabama and Clemson's prospects this year are loaded. I mean, the draft is filled with Clemson and Alabama prospects who are going to go in the top 3 rounds, and especially Clemson in the first round. And Dexter Lawrence, I mean, the guy was a beast. He actually got suspended from a performance-enhancing drug for the college football playoff, so he wasn't able to play. However, I think he's going to go in the 20s in this draft, and Wilkins is going to go a little higher, probably in the teens. Lawrence could be drafted a lot higher than 28, I would say. But here he's the best available player. The Chargers are a team that emphasizes drafting players from big programs. And they also are a team that have pretty obvious needs. Because, Piano Man, we're talking about needs and stuff like that, but you could make the argument that almost every team has a need for offensive linemen in general. Almost every team has a need for defensive linemen, regardless of where it is. And almost every team has a need for defensive back. But the Chargers' needs are very defined. Right tackle is a huge huge problem for them. Caleb McGarry could start immediately at right tackle. Defensive tackle is a huge need. They don't need defensive end, but they need defensive tackle. Jerry Tillery or Dexter Lawrence, that makes them attractive here. And safety opposite Derwin James. That is another need on defense. So maybe Jonathan Abram or Darnell Savage could be the pick for the Chargers. I don't want to rule the Chargers also out on taking a quarterback. They could trade up to get Drew Lock. They could trade for Josh Rosen if they send their second-round pick to the Arizona Cardinals. They were interested in Josh Rosen last year during the draft, but they didn't. Rosen didn't fall to them. And so if Drew Lock, Daniel Jones, or Dwayne Haskins happen to fall a little, don't be surprised if the Chargers trade up into the early 20s or late teens to snag them.
Yep, and we've got at number 29, you've got Kansas City. They have the biggest discrepancy between their offensive defense. They're ranked number 1 on offense and number 29 on defense. That's almost first to worst. They need anything on cornerback or defensive backs, edge rushers.
Yeah.
Eric Berry's gone.
Justin Houston's gone.
It's Justin Houston.
So they've lost both their edge rushers, which makes me think that edge rush may be likely here, defensive end. The problem is that there's not really any, unless they want to reach for one, and unless Jalen Ferguson falls here, it's tough to put Kansas City with a pick that is an edge rusher. They could reach for a guy named Chase Winovich, who I have going in the middle of round 2, but he's kind of the best available pass rusher on the board. So ultimately, I think the Chiefs are going to have to go defensive back. They really should have, even though edge rusher is their biggest need, they probably should be playing it safe. Like you said, 29th ranked defense. They probably should be playing it safe and just take the best overall defender on their board, regardless of what position that defender plays. And so that's what I have them doing in this draft. I think defensive back is probably most likely with them. Greedy Williams is a guy that I really want to mock to Kansas City, that I might end up doing it to Kansas City, because I don't think Greedy Williams would pass Kansas City if he was there, and I'm not too confident on Williams going to Houston. So Greedy Williams, DeAndre Baker, the safeties, Jonathan Abram, those are some names to keep in mind for Kansas City. If Jalen Ferguson's on the board, I do think he'll be the pick. Also, we don't want to rule out receiver for this team. Tyreek Hill is going to be disciplined by the league. I happen to think that his football future in general is in jeopardy. So Marquise Brown would be an ideal replacement for Hill. DK Metcalf is a guy the Chiefs could be really interested in to help the offense there, kind of replace Hill.
Yeah, and we're at number 30 here with Green Bay. You've got them slanted here for the second tight end of the draft, Noah Fant. He became very popular for the fastest tight end 40 time. He's out of Iowa. Is it safe to say that the tight end situation hasn't really worked out for Aaron Rodgers? They've gotten him some decent guys, but it really hasn't translated into anything, into a big jump in passing yards or receiving yards, really, for the tight end.
Right. I mean, Jimmy Graham's obviously pretty washed up, and I think their offense under Mike McCarthy wasn't very conducive to using tight ends. I don't think the scheme was friendly to tight ends, if you will. This new scheme will probably be more friendly to tight ends. However, tight ends take a long time to develop, as we know. Tight ends and cornerbacks, they almost never hit in year one. It usually takes them 2 or 3 years to get fully developed, even by some of the best tight ends. Green Bay loves T.J. Hawkinson in this draft. So if they draft him at 12, I don't think Fant's going to be the pick here. But if they miss out on Hawkinson, I think that Green Bay's a little worried that they might miss out on a guy in the second round like Irv Smith, another tight end. So I do think Green Bay's going to address tight end more than or sooner than receiver. A lot of analysts have them going receiver there to help Devontae Adams, but I think tight end's more of a priority, even though they have Jimmy Graham, Mercedes Lewis. They're a little long in the tooth, and they can also learn under. Jimmy Graham's the perfect guy to learn under if you're a fan because they're the same type of player. So, they both can't block. They're both really athletic receivers. So, basically, I see Green Bay kind of using this pick on probably offense because, again, it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of good defenders available here. I could see Caleb McGarry, the offensive lineman here, if they don't address offensive line in the earlier in the round. Also, I wouldn't be surprised with a guy like A.J. Brown at receiver. But, again, I think that tight end is more likely here.
So what you're saying is the number 10 offense with the number 22 defense should select 2 offensive players in the first round?
Yeah, I am saying that because I think that they got a new coach and they want to – the new coach is offensive-minded, and I think he's going to want his guys in there.
We have the L.A. Rams at number 31. Their needs aren't too much. I mean, even on defense, they're ranked 18th, and they're not terrible. You've got them going with a defensive tackle from Notre Dame, Jerry Tillery. Is this just what's left out of the first round, or is this somebody that they're actually targeting?
It's not somebody they're actually targeting. This is just a player that I think, and I'll go ahead and combine it with Jeffrey Simmons, I have New England taking at pick 32. These are just players that I am pretty confident are going to go in round 1. And a lot of mocks judge accuracy based on how many correct picks you get in round 1, not like slotted to teams, like how many guys you correctly predicted would go in round 1 that did go in round 1 in general. And I'm pretty confident Jerry Tillery and Jeffrey Simmons are going to go in round 1, but it's tough to say to whom. And the Rams do have a need at defensive tackle. Remember, Ndamukong Suh is no longer with the team. So they do have a need, but ultimately I think it's probably a long shot that the Rams even end up making this pick. I think they're probably going to end up trading down because they also don't have a second-round pick. And a team is going to want to move up to this range, like for 31 and 32, because of that fifth-year option with first-round picks. Remember, Piano Man, that if you're drafted in the first round, you get a fifth-year team option that you don't get from any of the other rounds. And why is that significant? Because if you have a position like offensive tackle or quarterback especially that you are able to keep on the cheap for a fifth year, that is huge, especially if you're going to be grooming somebody for like the first year of their deal and you don't want to lose that one of their 4 years. So that fifth-year option in round 1 is huge. So you see teams trade up for players who are either A, quarterbacks that they want to groom, so they have an extra year with their quarterback, and B, players that are hurt that they may want to kind of redshirt in year 1. And that's kind of the case with Jeffrey Simmons here, and that's why I kind of think he's going to be picked around pick 32 or 31. It might not be by New England. It might be by a team that trades back into the round. You know New England loves trading back. It might be a team that trades back into the round that covets Jeffrey Simmons, maybe like the Browns that didn't have a first-round pick. So, and then the Rams, I don't know if teams will trade back into the first round for Jerry Tillery necessarily, but Tillery is probably a guy who's actually going to go in the 20s. But I just currently couldn't find a team for him right now, other than maybe the Colts, or maybe the Chiefs that have shown interest in him. And so, this pick is subject to change, of course, but this is about just keeping Jerry Tillery in the first round to get those first round points. So, there's some mock strategy here. Another guy that I could see teams trading up for is Will Grier. I mean, we talked about him a little on a couple podcasts ago. Will Grier is a guy that is very raw. You don't want to throw him to the Wolves right now, but, you get that extra fifth year on him, and that kind of allows you to ease the burden of sitting him in his first year under a quarterback. So a team like the Washington Redskins, if they don't address quarterback in round 1, could trade up with the Patriots and take Will Grier. And, I say it like it's, like, okay, that's something to consider. But keep in mind that actually happened 2 times. The exact scenario actually happened twice in the last, I believe, 6 years, where a team is literally traded up to pick 32 just to make sure that they could get They saw that the quarterback they wanted was available, and they traded up. The first one was Teddy Bridgewater when the Vikings traded up to pick 32 to jump in front of Houston, who had the first pick of the next day, to take Bridgewater from them. And then the next team that did it was last year. The Baltimore Ravens traded back into the first round to take Lamar Jackson at pick 32. And the Eagles had that pick and traded out of it. So don't be surprised if I end up mocking Will Grier here. It might not necessarily be to the New England Patriots, but it might be to just try to get the points. He might be awarded from taking pick 32 based on draft history. And in that case, I'd probably move Jeffrey Simmons up to the Rams, who, obviously have a needed defensive tackle. No Ndamukong Suh there. And, again, I'd want the points there if a team traded into pick 32 and got Jeffrey Simmons. I'd want to at least have him at pick 31 so I could get partial credit for that. And lastly, we're kind of diving into New England here. Lastly, I wanted to say that New England has a desperate need at receiver, too. This could be the start of the receiver run if they do hold on to this pick. A.J. Brown is a guy that I think they're very high on. If Marquise Brown isn't taken for whatever reason, I could see DK Metcalf maybe going here. But ultimately, I think A.J. Brown's probably their favorite receiver. And this is a team that, tried to get Adam Humphries and missed out to the Titans. And it's a team that obviously really only lost Chris Hogan, and they lost Gronk too. They need pass catchers badly. Tight end or receiver should not surprise anyone here if they do keep the pick.
Yeah, and I've got a lot of people going to Irv Smith Jr. He's a tight end from Alabama.
Right.
Belichick loves going with Alabama and Florida guys, LSU.
I think that's a little high for Irv Smith, but I see the reasoning behind the pick. I think one of the reasons I think Irv Smith is risky is because, mocking him here, is because, first of all, you want to use that 32 pick strategically because of all the reasons I just stated, but also because nobody's going to be trading back into round 1 for Irv Smith. They're just not. And second of all, it's also not a guarantee that Noah Fant goes in round 1. So if Noah Fant's on the board for New England, they're not going to take Irv Smith most likely. So I think that it's possible that the media overvalues maybe Noah Fant. I know a lot of mockers have Noah Fant going much higher than pick 30 like I do. I wouldn't be shocked if Fant doesn't. He's kind of on my borderline for round 1 in general. So that's another reason that having Irv Smith there in New England is risky, because if Fant's available, then, that kind of throws that pick out. And I just don't think it's a very strategic pick if you're trying to get accuracy points in other ways for your mock draft. I just don't see Irv Smith being a very, could the Patriots take him? Yeah, I could see it. But I think that you have better odds trying to project somebody else there. And again, anything's possible in the draft. But to me, accuracy is more about going with the best odds that you can for each pick. And trying to hit on as many picks as possible. And I just don't see Irv Smith. I know he is popularly mocked at 32, but I kind of see him going later, probably in the first half of round 2. I was kind of hoping for a while the Saints could pick up Irv Smith, but I don't think he's going to be available for the Saints at 62 unless the Saints are able to trade up and get him. They'd have to be aggressive, because I think that a lot of teams want tight ends in the middle of round 2, and the Saints just pick too late to attack that unless they do move up.
All right, and that is pick number 32, the first round of the draft complete.
Piano Man and I are going to get into what we think the Saints are going to do with the 62nd pick overall and potentially in the second round. You're welcome to look at my potential prospects there on the Big Easy Sports Talk website. The mock draft is the first thing you'll see, of course. I think that the Saints have a number of options there, and we're going to get into that in a separate podcast closer to the draft, probably on Wednesday night, and I look forward to doing that. So thank you guys for listening, and stay in touch. A lot of these things will be changing in the next couple of days. So stay in touch with the mock draft. And really up until, a couple hours before the draft is, until I submit it to all the websites and everything like that, stay in touch with the mock draft. And I look forward to updating you guys on Wednesday with any potential changes. And we'll talk about the Saints. We'll also talk about the best draft props, betting props, because I know you degenerates out there love to bet on the draft. And hey, that is where Vegas is behind. I kid you not. Vegas spends all their resources on all things NFL, and I would never claim to be able to beat Vegas at any NFL bet except for the NFL draft. You can make some money on the NFL draft. I do every single year, and not to brag or anything, but I do, because Vegas is just behind on their props there. So be sure to tune in to, if you're the gambling type, be sure to tune in to the podcast on Wednesday when we kind of talk about my favorite prop bets for this draft.
Yep. So anybody with a gambling problem, come right to Nick. He's going to make you some money. Also, don't forget, this is a good announcement. We're going to be on 94.7 The Lake on Friday morning. That's going to be the day right after the draft, so it's going to be fresh off the first round. We're going to talk about how either well we did or how poorly we did, so tune in either way. But we'll also be talking about who we think is going to be being selected for the second round for the New Orleans Saints. So if you are a Saints fan, catch us in the morning. We'll be on 94.7 The Lake. It'll be at 8 a.m. to 8:30. We'll be doing an interview to promote the show. We'll also be talking about fantasy football, which the show me and Nick will be doing. But also, Michael and Nick will still be doing the local Saints and Pelicans information. So we just wanted to go ahead and give you an update on that as well.
All right. I'm looking forward to it.